All right, we'll call this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We'll start with attendance. Do you want to start on this side?
Alex Slivka, Chief Fiscal Officer.
Lance Wilbur, Office of Management and Budget.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LaFrance. Crystal Kennedy.
Okay, great. All right, well, we've got a little bit of a light crowd today. We've got a variety of reasons. I should just say they're excused because the committee as a whole. Chris is attending a Mustang District thing. Mr. Rivera, I think, had a thing for the campaign. Pete is in Juneau representing us at AML. Austin is traveling. I haven't heard from the other two members. So we will press forward. Let's see. First, we'll start with Mr. Wilbur.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for 2019, where we are working with the Controller Division is they have closed the 12th month, so which basically means all of the expenses that have occurred primarily in the last quarter. We've paid those invoices, did all that stuff in January, making sure all of those things have occurred. Many departments, including the Assembly, had taken the opportunity to transfer some remaining 19 money, moved it into 20. So when we do all of those supplemental appropriations, that helps close the 19 books to know how much was budgeted and how much was spent. Obviously, the ones that were on your docket, you're going to have a couple more, primarily for the Health Department. When those things all close, we will get the true 2000 and the end of 2019. As the end of December, with all of those actions happening on December 31st, we were 97.7% spent. So we had, roughly $10 million still that we had to make sure to account for. And there's a lot of stuff that hadn't been done. So we know some payments for the jail hadn't been done, some other costs. So all of those things are occurring. So as we close 2019, I do believe that on the expense side of the house, when you look at all of the departments, I think it's going to be very close. At this point, it doesn't appear that we're going to be overspent. I think it's going to probably be within 1% or 0.5%, very close. And, that includes the known overages from the police and the fire department. I counted those things in there, so when we look at the totality of the balance of all of those things, I still think we're going to be in pretty good shape. For 2019, one of the things we will have to do is for police and fire, we will be, when we know exactly what the number is for police and fire, Office of Management Budget will be submitting to you a supplemental appropriation to give them more money to basically balance out their 19. Because we need to make them, we've done that in the past, and that's what basically makes sure that those departments, not that they spend as they must have budget, but right now, you are aware of the police and the fire department. Rather than that, I'm not seeing anything that that's new or a surprise on the expense side. So you'll get a 2019 or a fourth quarter report with the, as of December 31st, you'll also have the last quarter for the utilities. You should see that in an AIM coming to the Assembly for information. So when you receive that, if you have questions, I'll make sure that I share those with you as well.
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what figure are we looking at for balancing out AFD and APD at this point?
So I think I think the total, I think it's probably going to be 2 to 2.5 each. So probably $4 to $5 million total.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know right now, but that's kind of where I'm thinking at.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that's what's going on with 2019. And Alex, I think, can agree with it. This close of this fiscal year has actually been the fastest we've done it since 2016. I mean, we're really, Controller's Office and others have just really moving along really well. The fact that we are in the 13th month, closing the 13th month, is an impressive action. So,
Ms. LaFrance, you have a
Thank you,
question?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilbur, this may be a side issue, but you had mentioned payments for jail, and this is our portion,
right?
Correct?
Yes.
And has the state's portion gone up or down or remained the same? Because it seems I recall at one point we picked up a bigger share.
I think this payment is the same amount. I don't recall if we picked up a bigger share, but I can ask Chief Dahl and those guys. I think we'll find out.
Is it based on actuals then, like number?
I think it's based on a contractual.
Okay,
It's based on a contractual number, not a activity number.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
The AFD, APD overages, it's been a couple of months since we talked about it. AFD, are they both related to the SAP settlement?
I think most of the fire department, I would say half of the fire department is going to be related to the leave cash out, and the other part will just be overtime and other things going on there. For APD, I think about $1.5 million of that, $1.2 million of that. I'll find out the number is. It's really due to overtime, and almost all of it is in dispatch. And
Okay.
as you know, that when we built 2020, we added some positions so that we could back that up a little bit, help them out in dispatch. So I think we're on a path to rectify that for 2020.
Thank you.
As it relates, unless you have any questions on 19, I'll talk about 20. Okay, so the 2020 budget, we are in the process of first quarter budget revisions. Many of you should have received the calendar. If you'd like another one, I can send it to you. March will be a very busy time for us in management budget. Department submissions, including the assembly, if you have any, are due to us by the 28th of February. And so, and as I mentioned to the other departments, if Alex and Chris and Bill as senior managers, they need to see them before we do. So far, we don't have very many, at least the ones I know about. They're not surprises. So I think
I'm sorry, what was it needed by February 20th?
the first quarter budget revision requests from departments for the 2020 1Q revision.
Did we build, so, I'm trying to think of the timing on this. The Emoluments Commission has said the assembly members are going to get a raise in April. Is that something that needs to be handled in first quarter budget revisions? Because I think those, when do those go into effect? Do you know? Do those go into
I'll verify that if we did it before I'll verify with Marilyn on how, and with Desiree, whether or not they were done.
Desiree?
I did send Marilyn the resolutions
Okay.
a month or so ago.
Because they passed in late December,
They
right?
passed in late December, and they go into effect for the new members elected in April.
Right.
So I did give it to Marilyn
Okay.
for first quarter.
Okay.
So there will be 6 members then whose salaries will be increased by 10,000 each. Is that
I
right?
believe it goes up to around 45%.
Oh, I thought it was just 40 at first. But at any rate, so
And that
I mean,
might be the chair that does it.
so we're talking probably $60,000 to $70,000
Well, if
increase. in
Desiree
costs.
submitted them, we'll have them put those in the master sheet. I mean, we're looking at all of the things that we talked about addressing in first quarter when we approved the budget. The I-team, behavioral health, there were the MIT, there were a couple of things that we made some adjustments on. Those things we're already aware of, so we're putting those in the number. And then working with Alex's team as they're closing the books, we'll have some fund balance numbers in March, and we'll put that in. We'll also have some more information about the MLP sale, there'll be some certainty of it, and we'll make those adjustments as well. So we're moving along rather well right now. So right now,
Okay.
so far, that's all I have for 2020.
All right. Any other questions on 2020 or first quarter budget revisions? Okay. All right. Well, let's move forward then to Mr. Slifka.
So, a number of things. From the revenue side, as Lance said, we're still finalizing. I think we get a true picture of where things are next month. What we know preliminarily from the last time we talked to you in December is things got a little bit worse, so that where we are relative to projections for the whole year, we're roughly $300,000 ahead of where we thought we would be from a revenue standpoint. That's a reduction of about $1.4 million from what we talked to you about in December. Tobacco came in worse, which I guess is a good thing. People are smoking less, but they're collecting less taxes. Ambulances came in less, and that was primarily due to a charge against collections, which we're trying to explore, which was much larger than it otherwise would be. And remembering that oftentimes ambulances go out, they pick up people, and we can't get reimbursement for it. So, and then room tax came in a little bit less than what we thought it was going to be. But all in all, net of everything, we're going to be right where we thought we were for revenue. But we will know for certain come March when, as Lance says, you know, it's not just 12 months. We have a 13th month, a 14th month, a 16th month, where we go through, depreciation, capturing all the assets that got put on place, where they charged, all that kind of stuff. And, but we should have in March a good number. Some things to remember, we've talked about before. The fund balance, no matter what, is going to be negative because we spent $9 million last year on earthquake stuff. We have stood up a bi-weekly executive team meeting on earthquake reimbursement, and so we expect of that we're going to get back at least $7 million through this year to bring that down. We are as well working with them in conjunction with the prior meeting. Solid Waste still have to spend its $10 million to rebuild its landfill building. We want to make sure that we manage the cash flows on that well. Some positive news, which we've kind of talked about on and off for years. Many years ago, we borrowed these Build America bonds. We got a subsidy. It's been problematic getting that subsidy. For some reason, in 2015, the IRS garnished about $500,000 worth of that subsidy, and we've been fighting, trying to get it back. And then in 2019, they took another $400,000. So after years of frustration, we engaged Senator Murkowski's office to actually get somebody at the IRS to talk to us. That seemed to prove beneficial. We received a check earlier this week for $220,000, of which $40,000 of that was interest on the money they held incorrectly from 2015. So hopefully over the next several months, I mean, it's $1 million, but this will, $500,000 of that is stuff that's long gone. So that will be revenue above the tax cap, everything that goes with that.
Note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Dyson.
So that is a real positive development. The other thing I mentioned also, we were down in San Francisco meeting with the rating agency. We will be issuing a tax anticipation note in March for probable maturation in December. This is what you guys approved at the last meeting. It's purely for cash flow reasons so that we don't have to sell our long-term holdings. I will tell you that the probable outcome this year will be net zero income because we're going to borrow money probably roughly about 1%. We're currently earning money in the cash pool probably close to 1.5%. So that's $500,000. If we issue $100 million, which is unlikely, it would be $500,000 worth of gross profit. Then after all the issuance fees and everything like that, the net cost is probably going to be close to zero. Last year we were very fortunate in that you had a huge move in the marketplace, and so we earned a return on the cash pool of close to 5%, which translated into roughly a $3 million positive impact due to the tax anticipation note that we issued last year. Very unusual. Usually it's just a wash. And the final thing, we talked a little bit about MLMP. Hopefully, yes, the decision comes out on the 28th. We will, as you approved as well, have to give notice to PERS on the 27th to terminate the employees because they have to give 90 days notice, and the last day of employment is May 28th based on the current schedule. If something goes awry, that's not a critical error, and we'll be able to work around that. But from a scheduling standpoint, we're going to sign all the documents on April 24th, so that's pretty much going to set in stone the money that we're going to get on May 29th, and that's the current schedule.
May
So that
29th?
May 29th is the current structure where all the money goes.
Okay. Questions?
Excuse me,
Yes, Mr. Dyson.
sorry for being late.
Sure.
The group of employees that you give 90-day notice to, these are being terminated.
Correct. So
And
we're selling.
Who are they?
They are the roughly 55-odd employees at MLMP who
Oh.
do not work for any of the unions.
Yeah.
So non-reps, execs, and the cost to the municipality is going to be $2.8 million in terms of termination charge to bring all of those people whole, but we still have the ongoing liability, which will stretch out for another 20-odd years right now, which is probably another $25 million. And that, again, that's an unknown, currently estimated actuarial number that PERS needs in order to fully pay off their past service liability. and that's the 22% that we currently pay on everybody right now.
Okay.
So, I'm about to do the calculation. 2.8 million for 50 people.
55 people.
It's about
That gets into the adult numbers.
$50,000
Yes, it does.
a person.
And that's cashing out the benefits and all that.
No, what that is that's saying these people are no longer, because they've been terminated out of PERS, we have to make them whole, fully vested. And so wherever they are in their vesting schedule, we have to pay to get them fully vested.
Oh,
$56,000.
so they don't lose their, and I suspect many of those are tier 2 or tier 1.
There are a few that are tier 1, some tier 2, some tier 3, mostly tier 4.
Right. Thank
Is
you.
it $56,000 a person?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
No,
I just wanted, I was just
yeah,
curious.
something like that. That's
Okay.
about what my mind came up with.
Uh-huh. All right, any other questions on MLMP sale? Okay. Anything else, Mr. Slifka?
That's it.
Great. I was just gonna comment. I wonder if it actually is people smoking less, or if they're just smoking, they're vaping more, and we don't tax vaping.
It's unknown that they are, and yes, so the obvious solution is to tax vaping.
Yes, it is. Okay. So, any other? That's it. Okay, we'll move on to C. Mr. Clouda.
Sure. All right. Quick update. For the record, Nolan Clouda, Budget Advisory Commission Chair. Couple of updates for you guys. We did our annual strategic planning session on January 24th. That's where it's become an annual tradition where we take most of a work day and talk about our priorities for the coming year, our successes for the last year, and do some in-depth planning. At that session, we heard from the finance co-chairs, Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Quinn Davidson, also from Mr. Bockenstedt from the mayor's office about some of their interest in working with BAC or some of the things that they would like us to work on. What emerged from it was our main interests for the coming year are revenue sources, generally speaking, as well, and in particular also the stormwater utility is a major one. There's some interest also in the Project 20's concepts in maybe bringing that to a state where it might be maybe more ready for a future ballot initiative. Other broad-based taxes are of interest to us as well. And what we've also done is divided up into where each member of BAC has a one or more departments that they're going to focus on over the course of the year, and in that time they're going to try to become pretty in depth in the budget concerns of that department. Some of them we had some help from Lance and OMB in coming up with which departments are more larger and more complicated versus some that are smaller, a little bit easier to look at from a budget standpoint. So some of the lighter ones, we have some members that can be more than one department.
Mr. Dyson and Ms. Salto.
What's the criteria you guys use for figuring out which one you're going to look at?
Sure. Through the chair, we mostly self-identified interest. People picked the departments that they were interested in.
Self-identified means members of the commission.
Yes, through the chair. That's right.
Yeah. So, if I may, if I was doing that, I'd think, which ones are we suspicious that it's not as efficient or off mission or not at the core of what government should be doing? Kind of look at that, and you may hear, as I do, of sometimes some problem areas in some departments, and so on. Right.
Through the chair, a lot of times so police and fire are two obviously the biggest departments. Those have a lot of interest. I think I volunteered for fire, probably in over my head on that one, but I believe someone is on police, and then other ones that are fairly high profile, parks and recreation, planning. All of those are all spoken for. There's more departments than we have people, of course, but a lot of the higher profile or more complicated or interesting ones are the first ones that were selected.
And just a final thing. So, consciously or subconsciously, I've been interested in the ones where there's a choke point, that's keeping public functions from being done. Maybe the prosecutor's office here is what I've been thinking about and so on. It's an impediment to it, and we've heard here a little bit about our problems with turnover because we're not keeping our salaries competitive. And would those be things you guys would you consider within your venue?
Through the chair, I think those are all potential things we consider. I think that we've treated it so far as each department has its particular drivers, and for us to spend some time trying to understand what those are. And all the things you're mentioning are likely to be relevant, for different departments.
Yeah, and what I just said is not a criticism at all.
Oh, sure.
And I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Destin. Mrs. Alto?
Thank you. Along the same lines, I'm particularly interested, if anyone wants to look at the health department, we do a lot of pass-through on grants, and we're not necessarily always up to speed on what those grants do. We get a lot like state money pass-through, and it would be nice if there was, and I've mentioned this to Mr. Dunbar and Ms. Quinn Davidson, but some kind of review so we substantively know, like, are those programs, fitting them with the mission of health and what the municipality is wanting to do? Do they make good sense? We just haven't really looked at them. We kind of just routinely approve them because the work is going on and being done. And particularly in the health department, I think we're asking the health department to do a lot. And I guess to the extent that we can support them, even maybe through health policy somewhat, or some combined effort to see are they doing what they want to be doing, what they're really good at doing, and what makes sense, not just maybe following the money.
Right. Through the chair, that is, health department is one, Tasha Hodge from our group, who actually works for NTHC, knows the public health space, is the one who volunteered for that one.
Ms. Kennedy?
Well, and I just kind of want to add to that. That was kind of a concern of mine too, as well, just in terms of, it's a lot of times it's easy to take in money just because it's there, and whether or not we know that things have really been effective or useful. The other thing that you kind of have to watch for is a lot of times you take in grant money and then it has a tendency to go away, but you don't want to lose a particular service. So things started to get a little more muddy then. So anything that I think there'd be a lot of good information that could probably be really helpful in terms of when we do want to accept those grants and to what extent we do maybe overextend the health department because of them. So that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Fred, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and when you look at it, revenue, the vulnerability of those revenue sources that Megan's just brought up is really profound because we start building programs and want to continue them. They're based on these pretty capricious sources. And so that's a very valid thing to look at. And so on. And another thing I've always wanted to do and haven't got done during the time I've been here is look at missions and measures. It can be a very valuable tool, but my sense is that those get less effective because it's difficult to measure outputs, and there's a real tendency for all of us to measure activities instead of outcomes. And if and when sometime, I just encourage you all to look at that, and because it's a valuable tool that I don't think we've used. There's never been a discussion in my 3 years here on budget and so on and so forth about the success of making the measures and if the measures are valid and so on. And some of these things like health department, really tough to measure those. But I just commend that to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and through the chair, I think that that's something I'm personally really interested in that I don't think that we discussed as a group for BAC, but I do perceive I'm from Alaska, but I had an education in local government in the rest of the country, and that was what I did my graduate work in. And Alaska is frankly behind the curve, not just me, but Alaska is very behind the times when it comes to measuring outcomes and tying budgets to performance. I think that's really not something that we do in the state for the most part, and it is a big gap between how government is practiced here versus elsewhere.
And if I may, the stupidest thing that management, us, can do is if a group isn't meeting their measurements, and so on and so forth, cut their budget. and actually they may need more resources. And I'm sorry, thank you.
No worries. So I have one angle here. Jason, you might be able to speak to this too. Who on the BAC is handling Parks and Rec? Do you know? Do you remember?
Through the chair, Mr. Chairman, I should have brought the list. We have a list of who's doing what. I don't remember everyone on hand. I want to say, was it Carla? Yeah, that's Carla. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say something to flag for her, and she probably might already be aware of it, but we've recently got a slew of emails from the hockey community, and it's tied to a broader issue. The hockey people, they have their own sort of subset of issues, but there's a broader issue with the management of several of our facilities. And my question for you, Jason, I think we just put forward, have we let the what do you call it, the ITV or whatever yet? Because we're going to come up on the end of SMG's contract, isn't that right?
Right. I don't know if it's gone out.
But it's either gone out or it's about to go out. And then we have until the end of the year to figure out who the winner is, essentially. And then within that, so there's a conversation of one, do we stay with SMG or go with somebody else? Keeping in mind that we are losing a lot of money at places like Sullivan Arena. I guess Sullivan Arena isn't under Parks right now. But there is this conversation about should we bring some of these facilities back under the Parks and Rec Department? That is, my understanding is being discussed. I don't know at what level, Jason. I think Jason
Chris.
Josh and Chris are talking about it. But it's something I think for whoever is the Parks and Rec person to be aware of, to be thinking of, and for your body might be considering it too. I mean, it definitely has a budget implication right now. We are losing money at the Sullivan Arena, and we are, depending on who you ask, things at Ben Boeke and Dempsey are like, yeah, I don't know. It's well, but the ice is the most expensive in the state, and there's issues there. So I'm sorry, Ms. Kennedy was in the queue, and then Ms. Alto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if this really would fall within your purview, but one of the things that I was curious about in your budget is when we pass a bond, we typically have operational money that goes along with that. You know, the regular maintenance year to year. And that then would go right into the operating budget rather than the capital budget. So I guess my question in that would be is, do we ever have any real way of tracking that in terms of how much money we know we're actually taking out from a bond that's actually going into operations? And do we apply that money to the specific projects that it was actually approved by the voters for? And I don't know, maybe it's one big giant question that would be more than what you guys would want to delve into, or maybe it's more of an auditing question as well. But anyway, if that's something that would be interesting, then I think it would be interesting, put it that way. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, through the chair, that is a great question for Lance to answer.
The answer to your first question is no. The answer to your second question is yes. The O&M is not charged to the bond. The O&M is charged to the taxpayer. So when they vote for the bond, you approve the debt, and then you approve the O&M. And the O&M is calculated based on the size of the improvement. So as an example, if we have a 2-lane street, we're going to make it a 4-lane street, and we're going to put lights and sidewalks for 1 mile. We know how many lights, how long it maintains all that. We get that estimate from them. And then what happens is that money goes into the operating budget of street maintenance, and then they allocate that as part of their overall cost for everything that they do. And then they can track, probably not by individual location, but by total miles plowed, total lights paid. But we can figure that out on how it's done. And we do have somebody that's going to be looking at the capital program to understand primarily how it's done. We're working with Kent Colhays and his team on PM&E, and then we can add that question in on how do we illustrate the tracking of the O&M into the budget and how it's applied. Yeah, I mean,
because essentially that's voter approved.
Exactly. Yep.
So,
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Ms. Alto.
Thanks. To follow up on Mr. Dunbar's point, I've recently been having some emails with Mr. Schutte about Sullivan Arena in particular, and I asked if there was a strategic plan as to how our public facilities fit within our public spaces, but to the extent someone's doing Parks and Rec, it would be really interesting to look at all the money we're spending in Parks and Rec and then try to figure out should that include our other public spaces? Like, is it public spaces, or because those are recreational spaces, are they not? I mean, I think it's time to have a conversation around that, and whether that's driven by budget or that's driven by someone else. I think it's really important, especially when something like the Sullivan Arena is costing us some significant money, and we're talking about how does that management structure and that those kinds of contracts fit in with our overall plan for what we have for the municipality. So to the extent that the person who's interested in Parks and Rec is interested in kind of noodling that question, as I like to say, as they look at the things, I'd really be interested in that feedback as we move forward.
Through the chair, thank you for that. Couple
Fred has a question.
Yeah, just to encourage you, we have apparently a very good audit team, and I would encourage you to, if there's research that the commission needs done, to consider the idea of having that group do some research for you to give you baseline stuff.
Oh, we're going to start with the audit team. We're going to review them. We're going to start with anybody else. I mean,
Well, it's been my job as chair.
Well, he did say parent.
And so far they fooled me if they're not good. But and they have a base workload, but with some thought, they can do some special projects. On the other end of it, there's ICER at the university, and I found them to be sometimes interested, particularly in broader picture, trend kinds of things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay. So Mr. Cloud, do you have something to
Oh, after Mr. Cloud.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of other quick things. We lengthened our meetings to an hour and a half so we can conduct more business. We were feeling a little constrained by that, so we had pretty much a unanimous commitment on that to extend, so we can actually devote a little bit more attention to issues. In our last meeting, we reviewed the school budget. Mr. Ratliff presented on the ASD budget, and so we are probably going to have a resolution issued on that to the assembly, and we may be scheduling a work session to spend some more time on that too. So
we were waiting for the board to take action last night to find, Tuesday, find out what they were going to do, if they were going to do something else before we scheduled the work session. So we needed to know what they were going to do. So I've been contacted with the school district to find out their schedule before we schedule some time with them, because the school board's got to submit their budget to you in a couple weeks, and then so we got a little time. We're working within it.
Yeah, because you're increasing your workload by 50%, we're going to give you a 50% pay increase.
Okay.
This is
Coffee and cookies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cloda, thank you for all the work you're doing and all that the commission is willing to take on. This is really great. I was just curious with the focusing on a department by members, do you have like guiding questions or deliverables in mind?
So maybe I could start. So
Sure.
I think we're going to start at a very high level and assume like they don't know anything about the department, because in the past they've been very interested to know more about all of the departments as they're reviewing the budget. This is something that's been on their mind last year. This year they've sort of structured that. So it's going to sort of start off with an introduction of this is what we do. This is what we do in the health department, everything that we do. But also the questions that Mr. Dyson had mentioned, some of the, are they in jeopardy on a revenue? Are they in jeopardy on a program? Is there programs they anticipate to be taking over? What are the things that they're doing that they could do differently? What are the things that they are doing that they shouldn't be doing? I mean, just basic questions. There's really, it's an opportunity for the Budget Advisory Commission members individually to become familiar with departments so that they can share that collectively. So as a group, when they're reviewing the 2021 budget, they have a more in-depth understanding of how the departments are built and what their expenses are. And so when we're talking about trade-offs or making recommendations, they have a better understanding of that. And so, but these questions about performance measures and outcomes, and those are the, we've done it before budget. When I was a department head director, I had Budget Advisory Commission members come and speak to me about how things were going in transit, and what could we do different, what are the things that we saw on the horizon, and it was just information for them so that when they were making recommendations to the administration about budget policy choices, they were more informed about it. And it's just more of an education and engagement than it is. And then some of the things that, if you have specific questions that you brought up, I've written them all down. There's only so much time, and so while they're trying to do it, they're going to dive in this deep, not this deep.
great.
Yeah, that's marvelous. I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that when these guys are gonna make presentations to the advisory commission, the assembly members know. And there's no use you guys having to go through that dog and pony show twice. And if you could inform assembly members, particularly new ones, there's some evidence that even us old dogs can learn. Scam, but what an opportunity both to save you guys this time and to keep us more informed.
Yep.
And particularly in a fluid situation like you're in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Anything else, Mr. Cloutier?
That's it for me, but thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, scope and status of paid correction liability. I know Mr. Falsey is traveling. Is there anyone else here
Yeah,
from?
I'm going to do it for you, so
Okay,
you can find
great.
my notes. So I spoke with, as Mr. Falsey mentioned last week, we had sort of a reinvigorated team of individuals. We had Susie Marshall Philippe on her team has been working with payroll and really looking at making sure that there's focused effort on doing some things. So I asked Susie to just summarize this, and so I'm going to read some notes from her. So basically, on the union side of the world, we don't have any new grievances coming in the door. So things are improving a lot. The amount of the ability to which to fix pay corrections is moving along very well. On the IAF side, all of the payroll audits have been done. They've been given to the union, and they're taking a look at those things. We're just waiting to hear back if they have anything going on. On the IBW side, kind of taking it in pieces. For the NECA employees, which is the first group, that's the temporary workforce. Those that expect other audits will be done, and then the rest of them will be moving forward. On payroll errors, we don't have any new system errors coming in. We're not adding any new corrective pieces to the system, so those things are working out well. So we're not adding new corrective actions. And as it relates to any pay errors that we might get, the level of them, I think, is we've got about 50, and it's a variety. Most of it's not on pay, it's about how their leave has been accrued or things like that. It's not their actual salary pieces that are being adjusted in. So right now, they have about, they said they've not quite 100 of them since the beginning of the year, most of them in this leave accrual piece. The average before SAP, it was roughly 30 per pay cycle, and we're a little under 50. So getting back a little bit to norm. So kudos to Philippe and Susie and the folks in payroll, Renee and team, to try to get this on track. The audits are going very well. They are working very diligently, particularly on the MLP audits, payroll audits, to get those wrapped up before the end of May. And so that is probably the one thing we're keeping the closest eye on right now to make sure that stuff gets done. So if you guys have any questions, I can relay them to Susie or Philippe or Bill and get back to you. Just let me know. But so far, so good.
Any questions for Mr. Wilbur? Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to. Part of what you said, it really is an insight. What are we doing right? What can we do better? Where are the problems at? What lessons we learned, classic stuff we learned in the military, how to action, critique. And it seemed to be really important to have some really bright guy like this one there look at the labor contracts and look back. What are the things that were done in the past, labor contracts, that make us vulnerable to some of the actions we're suffering here? And
We're ahead of you.
So we got an even brighter person.
We're already doing it.
Yeah, and that's a very wise thing to do. So ever since I've been here, I've been saying to you guys, don't sign a contract that limits valid management prerogatives that you ought to have, and don't give away. So, 15 years ago, it was perceived that we had administrations here that were very, very favorable to the labor contracts, and some terrible decisions were made that left us, $19 billion upside down on the PERS-TERS thing, and so on and so forth. That's water on the bridge, and so on. And then we recently had an administration that was perceived to be quite anti-union, and so on and so forth. So we get whipsawed. But I hope you can, do what you're doing and look and say, how can we be better at these contracts but not expose ourselves, to being blindsided by kind of these things. There may be some things that need to be rectified. And I think that these people need to have a report from you guys on what you've learned and what we want to do better in the future.
I will just, we can do that. I will just add that we are making the adjustments because, frankly, when the contracts were written about penalties and pay, they didn't envision entire meltdown of a financial system for a month. And so, to the union's credit, the bargain, they know that that is not right. And they know that when we are revising contracts since that time and making revisions as it comes to pay errors, things like the system that we had, the environment we were in when we were changing financial systems that were literally unforeseen and literally out of our control and in no way malicious, they recognize that stuff is not the norm. The stuff that you are literally, if the system is working and you're being late or you're not doing something that you should be doing, they're still holding our feet to the fire, and we should be held to that accountability. But the things where the way it was written and the way it could have been interpreted, it would have been disastrous. And I think we've learned, and I know that they have learned, and they've been helpful as we've been negotiating contracts since that time. We've had some adjustments in our language, and so the contracts that are approved, we can certainly just take a snippet and just show you an example because we're trying to use the very same language in all contracts. So we have learned some lessons, and we are making changes.
I want to stand up and applaud.
Don't do that.
Thank you. Mrs. Francis, you have something on that?
Actually, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else for Mr. Falsey in the person of Mr. Wilbur? Okay. Other business? I don't believe we have any unless another one of my colleagues has something. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question. I think I had asked you, Mr. Slivko, a while back about the idea of whether or not the Anchorage School District could actually use their fund balance if we were to allow them to do that and not have the requirement for the municipal bond rating. Did you come up with any information about that?
We do have a fund balance policy in place for them as well. It would very much get into issues with the rating agency if they were to go down that route. And so I think we are closer to the real resolution, which is a question of insurance, so that do we need to have insurance so that we can't get FEMA reimbursement? So we are hopeful that I think within the next month that we will get closer to that answer, which is still uncertain. We've been unable to get insurance that is anywhere that approximates reasonable. The most recent quote that we got that was firm that the school district got was a total of $10 million worth of insurance for $1.8 million is I believe the premium per year, which is non-economic at all.
Right. Well, I'm not sure that gets to my question because it was really all about the fact that we're not going to get the state reimbursement for the bond debt.
Right.
And we know that adds up to about $20 million for the district. And they figured they could find $4 million to kind of cover that bond indebtedness. But there was about a $16 million that they couldn't cover for their bond, which is a totally separate pot of money than their operational budget. So the idea was, where can we fill that void other than going straight to the taxpayers? Because we've heard the number that's about $48 per 100,000 worth of property value. So the question is, where can we help them find $16 million that we don't just have to turn around and charge the taxpayers for?
I think unfortunately the short answer is nowhere. That they have a fund balance policy that, like the municipality, that the rating agencies look at that together and they look at our compliance with that. And that was, one of the questions that we addressed with them when we met with them yesterday.
Okay.
Was very much along the lines of, as I said earlier, we're going to have a negative fund balance this year. We're probably going to go under our 10 and our 2, but we have a plan to recover that over the course of this year. They would look at it much differently if the school district were to choose to actively ignore their fund balance policy and take it down by that amount of money. the negative implications in terms of a rating decrease and a commensurate increase in the cost of borrowing it starts at $5 million a year and goes up in terms of the increased borrowing costs. So it's just, they're better off recognizing that they have the authority to tax for it, but that's obviously their decision.
Well, they don't. We do. We have the authority. They don't. But okay. Well, yeah. That was my question: is can we basically free that requirement up? Make an exception for this year so that they don't have to live up to our expectation of the bond rating requirements, and if we could allow them to dip into their fund balance. But if you're saying the bond council or the bond market is going to frown upon that, then that's basically a no. So.
Yeah, the rating agencies who look at it,
Sure. Yeah.
give us our rating would
Frown upon it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. France?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the 16 million is just for this year. So we know we've got more coming. And are going to need to have a longer term solution to coming up with that money. And my question is, to Ms. Kennedy's point about the fund balance and the self-insurance, why does the school district have to have a separate amount for self-insurance when the facilities actually are owned by the muni? And we have our own
they have
bucket
their
of money for that.
They have their own insurance policy. It's not. They're acting directly with FEMA, ASD, is in terms of the damages that they have and the damages they're trying to get reimbursed for, and the insurance requirements. We have the same insurance agent.
I guess I meant generally speaking, if there was one way to just say like, okay, some of their fund balance can be freed up because the muni will cover their self-insurance liability portion through not necessarily saying, that would result in any kind of savings, but was just wondering if that was a possibility and if it could. I don't know.
I guess if you step back, there really isn't. We have fund balance, which is there to secure our AAA rating. There really isn't money sitting around that could be used and expended for this purpose. We have to replenish the $9 million we spent already this year, and so the discussion we're having relative to the insurance is we are looking at the exact same issue. We don't have the same level of damage that the school district does, but we have the same issue we have to resolve with FEMA relative to if we're going to get reimbursement from FEMA, there is an insurance requirement that can only be waived through a discussion both with the state insurance commissioner and with FEMA, and that's the process we're trying to get resolved.
And I'm not talking about earthquake stuff. I'm just talking generally speaking. It seems almost a little bit redundant, especially since we own the building. So, but this is completely separate from any FEMA or insurance stuff.
Okay.
It just raised the question for me when Ms. Kennedy brought it up, why we handle it separately when actually the muni owns all the buildings anyway.
I can find out why.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Actually, one quick question. So you mentioned, because I wanted to ask you this before too, but the process with the state insurance commissioner, I know when you get a letter of non-economic viability, or I can't remember what exactly it's called, and then that's the next step going back to FEMA and saying we can't get insurance. Have we gotten that document from the state?
So we had the one conversation where they came back to us and said do more work from the standpoint of
The state did.
The state said to us, ask the question again of your insurance brokers. And so we asked the question again. The school district did get a firm quote for just $10 million.
Yeah.
We got a nominal quote for our $30 million worth of damage, where they said the premium would be somewhere between $4 and $5 million, which is at the same level of expensiveness, but it's not firm, and so that doesn't get us anywhere. So we are hopefully by the end of the month either going to get a firm quote for whatever, or no, you can't get a firm quote. And based on that, then we can go to the insurance commissioner and say either we can get some insurance, but it's too expensive, or we can't get any, and then the insurance commissioner writes her letter, which we then take to FEMA and hopefully resolve this.
Okay.
has dragged on longer than we had hoped.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the opportunity yesterday to bend Congressman Young's ear. He was out in Eagle River, so I spent some time with him, and this was one of the things that I brought up. And he was relatively unfamiliar with the challenges that we've had, both the districts and the municipalities. And I felt like there was probably a little bit more of a challenge with the school district because they're dealing with so many more buildings. And I hadn't really heard anything really from the Muni in terms of some of this pushback from FEMA and some of the strings that are attached in the whole insurance issue. And he really didn't know that was happening. So
I wouldn't
have we
necessarily-
reached out to his office?
I don't think it's reached that point yet, because I don't think we've gotten pushback from FEMA per se.
Okay.
We understand what the process is. We're going through the process of getting the insurance quotes. It's dragged on longer due to the very how unavailable earthquake insurance is in Alaska and unwilling. I mean, they've searched the whole world. They've sat down with Lloyd's of London, and this is all you can get, and it costs a fortune. So it's just non-economic. So I think we're at where we would possibly engage the delegation would be if we went to FEMA and they came back with an answer that was somewhere along the lines of, we don't care how much it costs, you have to have insurance. That would seem problematic to us, and I think that's where we would start that conversation.
But, may I, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
But isn't some of this kind of problematic because it's a lot of back and forth, and it's another hoop to jump through, and it's another string being pulled that it's really making it difficult. And it seems like it's all the work on our part when we were kind of at the very beginning under the assumption that, oh yeah, we can help you. And we're really not getting that unless, well, you have to go back and get this. Now go back and get another quote. Now find somebody. I mean, it seems to me like that's what I've been hearing, is that there's really a lot of, I mean, you may not want to call it pushback, but there are a lot of hurdles.
And that pushback hasn't been at FEMA. That's been more with the state.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson, then I'd like to move on.
Yeah, it almost gets close to our next subject here, legislative priorities.
Okay.
But particularly in the Senate, our two people are in some pretty key positions. And I think it's really worthwhile to have somebody sit down with them and say, look, here's a insignificant issue in the global sense that profoundly is hurting us. And they may be able to craft some language into a appropriate bill that's going through that says, under these circumstances, that requirement is waived. And it's, while we've got those people in those positions, I think, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Okay, legislative priorities. Do we have any additional legislative priorities that we're ready to talk about right now? Ms. LaFrance?
So what was on there for last year, for the budget meeting, do you remember?
So the committee didn't have any priorities. We just had our general legislative priorities, that included, I think the port was on there. I know my domestic violence thing was on there, our domestic violence thing was on there. I'm trying to think what the other funding priorities that were on that quest were.
We had some from the Health Policy Committee.
Yeah, that's right. Were they were funding or they were legislative changes?
Legislative, mostly.
Yeah, I think that's typically the case. Is in recent years, because the state is not generating revenue, we have been making legislative requests rather than budget requests. Although there are things that are sort of related to the work we did here, like asking them to change the way they do certain property taxes, so property tax abatement policies, things like that. But I at least don't have anything on the front burner that is budget related from this committee. But the former chair asked to keep that on there indefinitely, and I'm sure over the summer some things will arise. Budget items for 2021, our own budget items. Are there any additional things folks want to talk about right now? If so, they're probably appropriate for a first quarter budget revision. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, so I've been not effective nag about what I think, how we should approach them. And having a meeting with those in the Anchorage caucus that will show up is amongst the least efficient use of time and so on. And my recommendation has been that some combination of assembly leadership and the mayor's office meet with the chairman of the relevant committees
Yeah.
and our people from Anchorage who are in a position to make a difference on those committees. Those are the people that need to be really informed, and we need to have an excellent working relationship with. And going down to the legislature when they're in session, and even trying to get an appointment with those people who are up to their waists and alligators is extraordinarily difficult.
Sure.
So the time to do that after the elections, and particularly when you know who the committee chairs are going to be and so on and so forth, and sit down with some intense time with a very well thought out presentation, including the graphics, with those key people. And then to have, I was going to say team, but a very sympathetic legislator from the Anchorage area who is in the majority and in a key position to carry the water for us. And that ought to include our lobbyists.
Yeah.
And I feel very strongly about that. I think it's foolish not to do that. There is not a better strategy that I know of to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Dice. Anything else on budget items for 2021? Okay, with that, we have time for audience participation. Mr. Haberman?
My name is Eugene Paul Heyman, last resident for over 40 years, Anchor resident for approximately 20, currently resident of the Valley. Known for the record, Senator Member Dyson. I'm here at 12:12, that's the common meeting. I heard a number of presentations here dealing with the finances of the city, also including with the budget advisory. But nothing in writing. Nothing in writing. You're talking about the finances of the city, positions of the city, where it is now. I do appreciate Senator Member Kennedy and her bringing out an issue that should have been brought out without her effort in the presentations that were here today. Because that is an issue that has been brought in respect to the joint meeting of the Assembly and the school board, at the administration of the school board, where one member mentioned we've got issues here. And we've not been getting updates until Crystal Kennedy, today's meeting, is bringing this out. Thank you very much. But the fact is, where's the hard copy? Where's the printed copy? With all due respect, when one party is speaking for Falsey's report, but Falsey's not here. Falsey's known to do a written presentation of the numbers that was known to what the B number of liability of the city that was set up for what, 16 million approximately or whatever, dealing with that scenario. And this thing is getting worse and worse. And again, I remind you, there's another meeting that we have where the public coming here, you're coming here, there's no agenda out there, notice to what it's all about, no paperwork, and the only thing for paperwork to this meeting was this. And then for those who were not hearing my remarks in the last meeting just previously, and closing with this, I'm really concerned you still have the consent agenda where you have even legislation there, and 9B3 and 9B4, recommendations to the state legislature. That whole consent agenda, the state law requires to provide a reasonable opportunity for public hearing. You provide zero opportunity, and you've got that stuff going to the state legislative resolution. But the rest of it, along with this, needs to be connected with the people to have their say. And if I had to bet my life on it, that one of those items that's on there for resolution is when the press sees that, what's going to happen? They come to the meeting and they're going to hear you speak on it, but they're not going to hear from the public, and you're going to make a decision that's totally out of line and violates state law. And for a note here, during my break, I did attend the homeless assembly meeting yesterday, but the clerk's office had to go through the trash to get me the materials for that meeting. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to be heard? Any Anchorage residents? No? We're adjourned.